Kabayan Bloc has questioned the mode of discussion the Senate used before the signing of the corrected Maharlika Investment Fund Bill.
The bloc claimed that discussions through Viber violates the Constitution.
Hindi nga namin alam ano ba yung mga binago na mga provisions na lapag ito talaga sa Constitution.
Hindi ako nakilahok sa Maharlika Bill dahil tulad ng maraming Pilipino, marami akong pangamba tungkol dyan. Marami akong hindi naintindihan at maraming higit pa duda at pangamba. So ang ending ay kung magiging batas yan, tulungan na lamang natin ang administrasyon na punuin at tuwirin yung mga malabo o magulo pa.
So siguro, mabuti siguro ibito na lang niya ito para mabigyan ng mas maraming panahon ang taong bayan mapag-usapan talaga.
Senator Coco Pimentel is only one of those questioning the constitutionality of the corrected Maharlika Investment Fund Bill. He says the measure was tampered with substance-wise. If that is the case, what more can be done about the MIF now that it's sure to become a law? We will discuss in this episode of The Chiefs. Welcome to The Chiefs. Ako po si Robbie Alampay. Kasama po natin ngayon dito sa Mandaluyong. Aming pamintuan, Editor-in-Chief po ng Philippine Star, Ed Lingao of One News, Lucy Cruz Valdez, Hepe ng News 5. Chiefs, good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening. Happy weekend.
Anong basa mo dito sa Maharlika Investment Fund?
Pipirmahan na daw ni President Marcos as soon as it reaches his desk.
Fait accompli.
Diba?
Yan ang position actually ni Amy Marcos, di ba? Parang bakal na pag sa batas yan, pero kung mapirmahan, hindi susunod tayo sa batas. Which is
Baka pwedeng pirmahan over Viber din.
Pero ano ba yung proseso dyan? Because there's a question of constitutionality. Di ba? We're essentially say, Amy Marcos is essentially saying the law is what we sign.
Yeah.
But we also know that the law is whatever the Supreme Court says is constitutional.
Well, ako, ang sabi ng mga abogadong kausap ko, siguradong may magcha-challenge dyan sa Supreme Court.
Pero kailangan pirmahan muna to make it actionable.
Yeah, so
Diba?
but remember, if this is being positioned as an investment fund for investors, di ba? Our businessmen always tell us
Talo na kaagad.
what's the most important thing for them?
Certainty.
Certainty, di ba? So if it starts off with a lot of question marks.
Lalo na pupunta sa Supreme Court.
Oo, naku,
Where it can crawl along. Diba? Baka next administration na yan matuloy kung sakasakala.
Yeah, well, we'll get into that. Pero Bok, just very quickly, ano pa bang mga binabantayan natin na balita?
Well, hindi na binabantayan kasi
Nangyari na.
nabalitaan natin na
Yes.
yung submersible na Titan
Grabe yun.
had imploded.
Yes.
They saw debris.
No, but the question is, it's not the first time na lumayag eh.
Hindi.
So in the past, successful naman yung mga
Yes, but it's
trips,
also
no?
not the first time that engineers had been sounding the alarm and raising red flags about the design.
And there were several failed attempts of the same submersible to dive. At one point, it only got as far as 36 feet. Then had to
Winestyon
abort.
na nga daw nila eh. So, ewan natin kung bakit
Well,
tumuloy pa rin.
obviously, may mga death wish yung mga nandun. Hindi, no, really. But you have to have the heart of an explorer na alam mo yung risks that you're actually doing something whose fate is
Well, these are definitely rich people.
Exactly,
But
kaya
my heart
nga eh.
goes out to the kid.
To the kid.
That's the one.
Sinabi ng dad niya,
No,
no?
that's the one question mark I
Oo.
would have. Diba? To question
Yeah.
whether or not that kid
yeah.
knew what.
Right.
was
It's
getting.
a glass half empty, half full thing. I mean, you call it a death wish. I might also call it a life wish.
Yeah.
You want to live
But-
life to the fullest.
No,
If you can afford it.
Pero yung, kung ganun yung, hindi, pero kasi kung ganun kalaki yung risk, di ba? Parang hindi lang siya simple life wish, Ed. Sabihin natin, kung bucket list man siya, ba't sinama yung bata?
Oo.
Diba?
Yung ano ko.
Too young for a
I think
bucket
that's part
list.
of the fascination that people have
And
Adventure talaga siya.
Oh,
Extreme adventure.
It's really that.
And the designer inventor was a maverick.
Oo.
Sabi nga niya, I broke a lot of rules here. I bought a lot of off-the-shelf things like a gamepad, a Logitech F710 gamepad, $30 to control the whole thing.
Well, ang takeaway na lang siguro dito is that hopefully there's a lot to learn from this and that the next venture will be well, successful.
I think we're all at a certain level, as we said, just fascinated. A lot of armchair, not even experts, really just armchair viewers here. But if I got that right, one of the key question marks nga was whether or not there was even a regulatory body over something like
There's
this.
none.
So,
Wala.
no,
Yun
wala.
yung isang wala. Unlike space,
Yeah.
you do have, di ba?
Yeah.
Pero dito, if people
But
want
even in space, there's no regulatory body for
Wala ba?
spacecraft. No, each
Yung
country can do
commercial,
whatever it
wala.
wants.
Yeah.
So itong mga, hindi, but these private initiatives, itong kila Elon Musk,
Yan na
kila
nga.
Jeff Bezos,
Wala
there was
pa.
no regulatory body there.
It's too new eh. It's like AI eh.
Oh.
Nauuna yung technology sa
My
regulation.
understanding was in the industry, in the maritime industry, there is a voluntary, you can voluntarily put yourself under regulation
Yan na nga.
for submersibles.
Yeah.
So they could not force ocean
Vessels.
Yeah. No, this company
Oh.
to undergo regulation
Ah.
because it's voluntary. Sabi rin ng inventor, I've broken a lot of rules doing this, but in the end, it's so high tech that the technology is beyond the scope of
Yes,
press
at this point,
regulations.
hindi maintindihan ng mga tao eh.
He was using
Diba?
carbon fiber. He was not even using metal.
Kaya nga.
Wow.
It's a polymer.
Kaya-
Anyway, yan po yung mga, well, sinusubaybayan nyo rin yan, I'm sure, not just us, but tayo pagbalik natin, isa pang sinusubaybayan natin, of course, striking closer to home, the Maharlika Investment Fund, pag-uusapan pa rin po natin yan. We will need to take a break. The Chiefs will be right back.
I hope this
Welcome back to the Chiefs. Joining our discussion tonight, legislative and policy consultant attorney Michael Henry Yusinko and Action for Economic Reforms coordinator Men Santana. Men is also a columnist for Business World. Gentlemen, good evening and welcome to the Chiefs.
Good evening.
sirs.
Magandang gabi po.
Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you for joining us. Attorney Yusinko, if I may, I'd like to start with you kasi a lot of controversy over the Senate President signing what appears to be the final version. From what we're hearing from the Senate, it was the Secretariat that in the end collapsed two of the conflicting articles into one. Yung nireconcile nila yung 10 years and 20 years na prescriptive period. As far as you know, can that be done after the BICAM has approved? Well, technically approved the BICAM report.
No. The rule is very clear. The Constitution is very clear that after the third reading, no amendments shall be allowed. So what we're talking about here now, or what we should be asking ourselves is, what is the nature of the changes that were made? No? Syempre, from the side of the majority in the Senate, they will say that it was just stylistic changes. But if you look at the change, I don't think it's just stylistic or it's just correcting clerical errors. No, they change a substantive element in the provision, which is the years of prescription. So it can be argued that the change or the changes that were made are tantamount to an amendment, and therefore should not have been allowed. Because of the Constitution is very clear about that.
But sir, the other argument that they posed is in the discussion, the deliberations leading to the finalization of that bill, it was clear now that they were looking at a 10-year prescriptive period. So, ang sabi nila, so we just followed what the discussion, how the discussion flowed, and that was the spirit of the discussion. Would that make sense?
That I don't think that will fly, when it comes to arguing before the Supreme Court, because we will just look into what happened on its face, no? So what happened was the Secretariat made substantive changes, which they are not allowed to do. Now, even if you say that that was the intent of the plenary, the fact that there are several lawmakers questioning that should weaken that argument. The remedy would have been to bring it back to the plenary and just confirm that that was the intent. Because obviously it's really clear, no? It's patently, palpably clear that the Secretariat cannot make substantive changes like that.
Attorney, quick question lang. Has there been precedent for this? Any kind of case that approaches even similarity to this situation?
The most common that I can think of is issues pertaining to an enrolled bill. No? That enrolled bill meaning to say napirmahan na ng Senate President, napirmahan na ng Speaker, and napirmahan na ng Presidente, and others are questioning the content. No? So ang rule dyan is you cannot question the content anymore or the regularity of the enactment of the bill kung enrolled bill na siya. And the Supreme Court has said that hindi na pwede talaga unless talagang obvious na nagkaroon ng fraud or ng deception.
Paano kung nandun tayo sa sitwasyon ngayon na obvious, I won't call it deception, but obvious na may dinaanan na, obvious that there was a substantive change. And then we get to your other point, na napirmahan na ng Presidente.
That's right. So kung dumating na to sa Presidente at pinirma niya, and it is questioned before the Supreme Court, the enrolled bill rule will not apply, no? Kasi the unconstitutionality will lie in the fact that the amendment was made after the third reading. So that is the violation, no? The violation occurred even before the President signed it into law. And therefore, that makes the law unconstitutional.
Pero kailangan, yung enrolled bill ba, kailangan ng signature muna ng Senate President. Kasi yun ang sinasabi naman na hindi pa naman napipirmahan daw. So,
That's right.
Yung pagpirma ni Mig Subiri from abroad, yun, tatanungin ko din yun eh. Pwede ba yun? Pwede ba yun?
Viber ang isa pang issue dyan eh.
Pwede ba yun? I'm sure walang president na ganyan. No? Pero, pwede ba yun? Yung ginawa ni Mig Subiri, saka kailan siya magiging enrolled bill?
So, a bill becomes an enrolled bill, or a bill, the enrolled bill doctrine applies once the bill is signed by the Speaker and the Senate President and certified by the secretariats of each chamber.
So pwede nyo sabihin na wala pa kasing pirma ni Mig Subiri, kaya hindi pa siya officially...
Speaker Martin. Diba?
So hindi pa siya actually enrolled bill. So pwede pa nga silang mag-inject doon ng changes. Tama ba yun?
Hindi pa siya technically
no.
But not the Secretariat.
Yung enrolled bill is not yet applicable, but yung unconstitutionality lies in the fact that the amendment was done after the third reading.
By the Senate?
Whoever did it.
Hindi kasi di ba, attorney, yung Section 50, yung version ng Senate, 10 years. Ang version ng House, 20.
And in the Senate version, they have both, 50 and 51.
Magkaiba, di ba?
In the Senate version, there's Section 50 which provides for 10 years, and then 51 which provides for 20 years. Which is the point of conflict. It's an oversight. And then the House just adopted it.
Yeah, so pareho sila nagkamali. In other words, they're both in violation. Can it be argued, for example?
Let's just be clear, no? The unconstitutionality lies in the fact that the change was made after the third and final reading, which is not allowed by the Constitution. No? So, kaya nga ang argument is, what kind of change was made? No? Sinasabi, clerical and stylistic lang. So, which would be allowed by the Constitution. But the counter argument to that is the change that was made was not clerical or stylistic, no? It was substantive
Yeah.
because it pertained to prescription periods, no? And therefore, that would be tantamount to amending the bill, which is not allowed.
Attorney, quick question. If ang nakikita nyo, inevitable, hahantong to sa Korte Suprema, who can take it to the Supreme Court? Anybody, any Filipino citizen can take it to the Supreme Court?
That's a very tricky question, Robbie. No, right now, I can tell you that definitely the minority lawmakers will have the personality to bring it to the Supreme Court because clearly they are an aggrieved party here. No, kasi at every step of the irregularity, they've raised the alarm. No, from the point of yung certification of urgency, meron na sila sinabi na it's not allowed, and then itong changes that are made that are not allowed. So the minority lawmakers who have been raising the alarm since this bill was initiated, definitely they have the personality to bring this up to the Supreme Court. But as far as taxpayers' rule is concerned, it's also possible that regular taxpayers will have the personality to bring this to the Supreme Court.
But only after it is signed into law. Tama ba? Kasi kung hindi pa naman siya signed
Yes.
into law,
Hindi siya actionable.
hindi siya actionable
Yes,
by the
oo.
ordinary
That's what
taxpayer.
happened to the petition of the Makabayan Bloc. They
Oo.
questioned the bill
Oo,
very
before.
early on, and it
Yes.
was dismissed because of it has not actionable yet.
Okay, the other devil's advocate point that I want to make is this, no? So may Section 50 at may Section 51 na magkaiba. So in a sense, parang kino-correct lang nila dahil nagkamali lang sila na may dalawang conflicting provisions. Di ba pwedeng ang sabihin na, hindi, clerical lang yan, talagang 50 yung gusto namin.
Nalimutan
hindi
burahin,
51.
parang ganun.
Nakalimutan lang namin burahin yung Section
So
51.
first, it's not clerical, no? Again, it's substantive. The subject matter is substantive because it pertains to prescriptive periods of offenses. So if there was really a mistake in the final version, then the correction should have been done by the senators themselves, no? By the lawmakers themselves, not by the secretariat.
Okay.
They should have brought it back to the plenary
yeah.
Yeah.
and corrected the
Alright.
mistake.
But can I squeeze in that part? If the senators themselves made the correction, but not in plenary, but through Viber, would that matter? Would that count? Or
Of
hindi
course,
pa rin? Has
that
to be in
would
the
matter
plenary?
because Viber is not the plenary, no?
Okay.
It's not a session. It's not a
Kung may
plenary
chat
session.
group sila.
kasi sa
Hindi ba pwedeng plenary chat group?
Hindi, saka iuulitin ko yung tanong ko, pwede bang magpirma yung Senate President by Viber at ipadala by Viber? Is that allowed?
Yeah, it's good you brought that up, no? Kasi that's actually an irregularity also, no? I mean, just applying common sense and just applying, well, basically common sense, di ba? If you're the Senate President and you're signing something, a bill into law, you should be in the Philippines, right? I mean, physically, in the country or in the hall, in the session hall, no? It's not an excuse that you signed it in the Philippine Embassy. I would say, no, I would argue that that is also an irregularity.
Mabuti malinaw yun kasi yung ibang homeowners association mas matindi ang debate sa Viber kaysa sa Senado.
Buti pa yun.
Mas substantive
Huwag
doon.
na tayo
Matindi
mag-homeowners.
away doon.
Kahit
Hindi, but
tayo dito.
Let's just making light of it. In the meantime, kasama natin si Men Santa Ana ng Action for Economic Reforms. Men, I hope you don't mind that inuna muna namin yung mga legal questions. Now we bring in the perspective of an economist, but a non-economic question to you. First, if you don't mind, because kanina pinag-uusapan namin, if this has the character also of an investment fund, and we're going to go out into the world and say, oh, we're open for this, we're asking people to invest essentially in the Philippines, but we know with all of these questions, pagkatapos mukhang pupunta ang Supreme Court to, what is the risk for the Philippines to be launching something to an investment community that might say, teka muna, first thing we want is certainty and mukhang pupunta muna to sa Supreme Court.
Ruby, ang nakikita kong problem, Maharlika is not really clear what it wants to do. And I think even the investors, both local and foreign, are confused. Let's look at the supposed objectives of Maharlika and then relate that to a particular document that accompanies Maharlika, and that is the business proposal. Some senators did question the viability of Maharlika, and they asked the body, including the economic team, to produce a business proposal. And so a business proposal was drafted, signed by the economic team. The economic team certified the supposed economic viability of Maharlika. What does that business proposal contain? It says that the funds will be used to grow such funds. So Maharlika will be getting some funds and will have these funds grow through investments in equities, investments in high return projects. So the idea is to grow the money. This is different from the concept which also surfaced that the Maharlika investment fund is a way to attract investors. Pagkakaiba nun eh. Iba is you want to attract investors, and you have a mechanism which is Maharlika to attract investments. This is similar to the Indonesian concept. But based on the business proposal that the economic team certified, the idea is to have funds and let these funds be invested in equities, in different portfolios, and in high-yielding projects, including infrastructure, power, real estate, etc. Magulo kung ano talaga yung Maharlika. But if we base that on some of the provisions and also on the business proposal, Maharlika is a sovereign wealth fund. Which is to say, we use the funds that we have for investments that will make the funds grow. But ito yung problema, is that the role of government? Yung revenues, yung resources ba ng government, ang papel ba dyan ay should we use these resources to have them grow or to optimize the profits? That's not the role of government. That can be done if we have the excess funds. So babalik ulit tayo doon sa original criticism sa Maharlika. Do we have the excess funds? There's no problem about having a sovereign wealth fund. But the basis for that is to use the excess funds that we have.
Right.
But hindi excess funds ang gagamitin eh. Ang gagamitin ay yung capital ng Land Bank, ng Development Bank of the Philippines, yung dividends from the BSP. These are not exactly excess funds. Yun ang problema sa Maharlika. Hindi yan ang papel ng gobyerno. Pwedeng gampanan ng gobyerno yan kung merong excess funds, pero wala namang excess funds.
Mr. Santa Ana, wala bang ibang ganyang fund, investment fund or whatever you want to call it, elsewhere in the world? Kasi these are the same criticisms.
Yung mga binabanggit ng economic managers, meron ng Korea, meron ng Singapore, meron ng mga European countries.
I mean yung function niya, yung everywhere nga. Sabi nga ni Stephen Cohen niya everything everywhere all at once, ano? Kahit pwede ba yung labo-labo, sovereign wealth fund ka, investment fund, development fund, pwede ba yun in one fund na sama-samang ganon? Meron bang ganong similar model elsewhere in the world?
Kung ganon, hindi, ibig sabihin titingnan natin yung buo, di ba? Kung ganon, yan ang role ng buong gobyerno. yan ang role na, for example, yan ang role na Board of Investments to
Yes.
attract investors. Meron tayo National Development Corporation para gamitin yung whatever funds they have for development projects. In other words, Maharlika becomes redundant because those functions, those tasks can be done by different parts of government, including Land Bank, Development Bank, DSP. Hindi, isabihin ano mangyayari doon sa yung binabanggit na merong, tapos may tension yon. Kung gusto natin palaguin yung pera, hindi naman yon magagampanan yung
investment part.
Sinasabing gusto natin for development because the development programs have a different objective. Meeting high social returns. Social returns are very different from financial returns.
Okay.
Maaring yung financial return mababa pero malaki ang pakinabang sa buong lipunan like education, di ba? Public education or even public roads. Of course, meron din mga infra projects that can yield high returns. Pero babalik ko rin dun sa question ng function ng government. Ano ba talagang function ng government? Palaguin yung pera natin? Kung ganun lang yon, lahat ng nakokolekta ng BIR, i-invest na lang. Pwede mong i-invest sa casino, pwede mong i-invest sa bangko, pwede mong i-invest sa pula-puti para lang mag-grow yung pera. But that's not the function of government.
But one of the initial benefits that one of the congressmen defined, benefit that could be derived from the Sovereign Wealth Fund, this Maharlika, was that it was going to be kind of like a one-stop shop for investments and any kind of fund growing exercise. In other words, it will expedite the process of anything at all. So parang mas mabilis ang paglago ng pondo. Hindi lang siya redundant. Parang mechanism siya para mapabilis. Does that hold water?
Okay, again ang tanong, magulo nga eh. On the one hand kasi they're saying these funds will be used to grow them, to earn profits, to yield high returns. That's different from using the resources for investment programs or investment projects. Magkaiba eh. Ngayon, kung investment programs, investment projects, the question is, don't we have existing bodies for such? We have the Board of Investments, we have again, they have different purposes. Pero the bodies are already there. Bakit mo kukunin yung pondo from another entity or another government financial institution and fund Maharlika, and Maharlika will be doing essentially what these institutions are already doing.
Sir, let me bring in something that was mentioned to us by, I think it was Mr. Ricafort of RCBC. Ang sabi niya, there's at least one advantage in pooling together all these funds from different sources. It's parang economies of scale. You have a larger amount of money that you can use with less administrative costs because it's only one fund. And you can cut down on the expenses. I don't know if that also holds water with you. What do you think?
Okay, the question is, where will you use the resources? Mainly for bulky investments, di ba? Yun eh. You need economies of scale. You need a lot of investments for such. And these are mainly public investments. That should be done through the national appropriations process, through our budget. Why have a separate entity for that? Besides, if you look at, I'm sorry, whoever said that might not have read the Maharlika bill and the proposal. The idea there is to look for different projects where they will make investments. So, magda-diversify din. It's not just one particular program or a narrow set of programs where Maharlika will pour its resources. Again, ang problem ulit doon, una, para nga ba doon sa investments, doon sa sa mga development programs natin o para kumita? Kung kumita kasi, again, you diversify. Hindi pwedeng sa isang portfolio lang yan, di ba? Kaya magulo yung concept eh.
So in effect, you're saying, sir, na kung ang sakit ng MIF ay hindi naman siya gumagamit ng excess funds.
Yes.
At alam naman natin na wala naman tayong excess funds. So in effect, ang sakit ay, sakit siya in itself, no? Hindi na dapat siya gawin. So ang tanong ko is, bakit kaya po siya pinupush masyado?
Ng mga economic managers, sir,
Ng economic managers.
Na galing
yes.
School of Econ.
So it boggles the mind how respected economists, even, not just the economic team, no, have actually, and businessmen, have actually thrown their support into this. So what could be the reason for that?
Okay,
support?
my kindest interpretation there is, Maharlika had an original idea. In itself, there's nothing wrong about having a sovereign wealth fund. But that is predicated on having excess funds. And theoretically, we can generate the excess funds. For example, from the windfall from, say, mineral resources. Pero, very specific yon. Ang nangyari doon sa Maharlika kasi, meron silang concept ng magkaroon ng sovereign wealth fund, pero hindi nila alam kung saan kukunin yung resources. Originally, they wanted to get the funds from the Bangko Central's international reserves, yung foreign exchange reserves natin. Now, one can argue that the foreign exchange reserves are excess. Nakatabi lang yun eh. Ganoon. But then, the foreign exchange reserves also have a function to protect us from external shocks. So you need to grow the reserves. You just cannot use the reserves because they are a surplus. We need them to insulate us from financial crisis and other external shocks. Yung ating foreign exchange reserves, totoo, comfortable at this time, but these reserves are not comparable, for example, to what China, Korea, and the East Asian miracle countries have achieved. Kaya hindi natin magagamit yung international reserves noon. And that was the reason why Philip Medalla, the governor of the central bank, objected to the use of the foreign exchange reserves to finance Maharlika. So, tinabi na yon. Ngayon, ang gusto nila yung dividends ng BSP. But here, we have to ask, saan ba mas pwedeng gamitin yung dividends ng BSP? They're not actually excess because BSP itself needs capitalization. There's a law that requires BSP to increase its capitalization, and BSP can get that additional capital from the dividends. Pero ngayon, ang mangyari niyan, magda-divert yung dividends ng BSP para doon sa Maharlika. At the same time, even those dividends can be used for other purposes. We have a lot of things to fund right now because of the pandemic, because of climate change, because of continuing infrastructure spending. Government spending not only has to be maintained, but even has to be increased. But we have a situation where our borrowing has reached a critical level. So we need an increase in revenues. And so any extra funds that we can generate should be used for these development purposes. In other words, there's going to be a debate there. Where do you want to use the additional resources for universal health care, for climate change, or for Maharlika?
Okay, Sir Men, Attorney Mike, we just need to take a quick breather or a quick break, so please stay with us. We'll be right back.
Welcome welcome back to the Chiefs. We're still talking about the corrected Maharlika Investment Fund Bill with legislative consultant Michael Henry Yusinko and Action for Economic Reforms Coordinator Men Santa Ana. Attorney, nagtataka pa rin kami kung bakit hindi na lang nag-recall sa plenary ng bill, ano? Gaano ba kahirap yung process na yon? Alam namin, siguro maraming nakabakasyon ngayon sa mga senador, ano? Pero how hard is it? At saka napaka-unusual ba na i-recall kahit sandali yung mga yan, mag-plenary tayo sandali, ayusin natin yon kung talagang typo lang yon para wala nang question, hindi na pupunta sa Supreme Court. How hard is it? Wala bang precedent for that?
I can't recall any precedent, no? So I'm happy to be corrected in that regard. But kung ang tanong is madali ba, I suppose it will be difficult logistically kasi naka-break sila ngayon, di ba? Naka-break yung Kongreso, so scheduling a session might be challenging. Pero siguro as a compromise, the BICAM could have done it, I suppose, no? The BICAM, they could have reconvened the BICAM and the BICAM could have done it. Sila na yung mag-correct ng sarili nilang mistake, no? So as a compromise, hindi yung plenary, but the BICAM could have done it themselves.
Sir, baka pwedeng i-zoom kasi kung bina-viber nila is it possible to do it is it possible to do it online to call everybody online and then have a BICAM session?
Viber is online,
Oh, di ba? So, different platforms lang pero same thing online. Is that possible?
So we have to refer to their rules, no? If that is allowed in their rules, then I suppose it can be done. But
they've been doing it. They've been doing it through the pandemic, di ba?
Yeah.
Pero yung BICAM conference kasi, they were face-to-face, di ba? They were in, if I'm not mistaken, in Manila Hotel.
Pero pinapayagan nila kung may sakit, di ba? Kung may COVID yung pwede namang umattend by Zoom.
Pwede pa rin.
Under the circumstances.
Yeah, siguro, yeah.
Di ba?
I suppose they can do it because they've done it before, yung BICAM. I'm just saying na if they did the BICAM conference face-to-face, why can't they do it again, no? To reconvene and just correct their mistakes? And then yung mga absent, yung mga hindi pwedeng mag-attend na in person, they can attend via Zoom.
Attorney, assuming na wala, di ba? And then the majority insists na hindi, okay na to. We don't believe that it's substantive. We believe it was clerical. Therefore, ito na to. Paninindigan na namin to pag-transmit to Malacanang for the President's signature. So at that point, process-wise, ano na lang yun iaantay natin and where can the interventions happen? Am I correct in understanding that now we're just waiting for the President to either approve or veto? And assuming he approve, then we're just waiting for that approval, then people can go to the Supreme Court. Tama ba yung steps na yan?
Broadly speaking, yeah, that's the options that are left, no? So tama si Senator Coco. The President could veto it, return it to the Congress, and they do the corrections para wala nang question na akyat sa Supreme Court. Or they can be stubborn about this and just let the President sign it into law and then wait for the appropriate period for it to become law. And then the minority senators, I would expect, would bring it up to the Supreme Court, or maybe Mr. Santa Ana's group will bring it to the Supreme Court.
Pero Attorney, would it have been less troublesome if they just enrolled the defective bill with two conflicting provisions and had it signed, and then just later on passed an amendment to that law? Would that have been less troublesome than having the Secretary tinker with the entire bill and then having it questioned in the Supreme Court?
It's not going to be less cumbersome because you're going to have to wait for an amendatory law, right? The least cumbersome option was for the BICAM to just correct or make the corrections. No?
Yeah. Professor Santa Ana, balikan ko lang yun. Kasi unang-una, mukhang sinusubuan na kayo ni Attorney Yusinko ng kayo daw maghahain eh. Pero bago nyo sagutin yan, balikan ko lang yung unang tanong ko. Let me rephrase yung question ko kanina of whether or not, given all the confusion, both on the fundamental purpose, design, mission of these funds, all the confusions there, and now the certainty that this is going to go to the Supreme Court. Let's say that's a certainty. My question kanina is, what is the risk for government launching something like this and businessmen and investors, whether here or abroad, saying, teka muna, parang we want certainty and there's nothing. Let me rephrase that to be more pointed. Ang tanong ko is, given everything that you've already spelled out, not just today, but for months on end already, and given now these developments na mukhang pupunta to sa Supreme Court, does government run the risk of launching something that will be dead in the water?
As you said, Roby, it creates uncertainty when a particular law is still being challenged legally. But here's another problem. Let's assume that a remedy is found based on the proposal of Attorney Michael. Ang problem naman, and it might not be something that is constitutional, but it will have an impact on our economy. Why do I say that it's not going to be constitutional? Because we have remedied the problem, yung binabanggit natin about the prescriptive period. My metaphor there is something like this. We fix a light bulb, may problema yung light bulb. And part of the rule is you must have a good light bulb. And we are able to fix that. But the problem is the very foundation of the home. Yun ang problema doon sa Maharlika. So even if you fix the light bulb or you embellish that home, it's still going to be a big problem because the foundation is very weak.
Can you legally challenge that? I mean,
I asked our colleague. Ang binabanggit ni na Senator Coco, there is this thing about passing the test of economic viability. But the problem again is it's not just about economic viability. It's about it's more fundamental than economic viability because they can always say, well, it's going to be economically viable because we will be earning high returns, and that's very possible.
Right.
But that brings us to the question: is that the role of government? Use our resources to be invested in, say, real estate or in mining or in infra projects. That's not exactly the role of government. You can only do that when government has the excess funds.
Attorney Yusinko, what kind of a case would that be if you were to challenge it using that as your, premise for filing that case? Na parang the government is doing something that it is not supposed to do because there are already mechanisms for doing exactly whatever it is they want to do with the MIF to begin with.
So just to put Mr. Santa Ana's criticism in legal form or in law speak, as they say, the question is the Maharlika Investment Fund using public funds in a lawful way? Is it a lawful use of public funds? No? Kasi the Constitution, again, is very clear that public funds can only be used for public purposes. It has to be used under the authority of law, etc., etc. So if you are going to bring that to the Supreme Court using as a sidebar economic terms or economic arguments, that will have to be under the umbrella of, is the public funds being used in the right way or in the lawful way, no? Kasi the way that Mr. Santa Ana describes it is that the Maharlika will simply duplicate the budgeting process.
Right.
Right? So if just by seeing it that way, immediately you will think that cannot be allowed, right? Because the Constitution again allows only for the disbursement of public funds through the budget process. So if an entity, even if it's a government entity, duplicates that process, then that could be questioned, or it can be argued at least that that is not a lawful use of public funds.
Attorney, bago naman yan umakyat sa Supreme Court, kailangan muna ng pirma ni Presidente. So, sa tingin nyo, wouldn't it be easier for the President dahil sa ganitong gulo, na ibalik na lang yung bill for ginawa na ilang beses na yung ginawa ni President Duterte. Yung sa SIM card registration,
That's
remember?
right, yes.
Merong issue about bakit daw sinama, pati yung mga email address. Binalik niya. How hard would it be for the President to return it to, hindi naman tayo nakikipag-unahan dun sa SONA siguro, no? Pwede naman sigurong maghintay yun.
Siguro. May matinding premise yun, ha? Medyo, pwede ba siya?
Galing mo naman mag-speculate.
No. Pero marami siyang president, di ba,
Literally, walang
attorney?
nakaisip ng angulo na yun.
Wala.
Well, that's
Diba?
actually
It's happened a lot, diba? Binabalik ng presidente. Diba?
that's really the problem with this bill, yung minamadali. Like what Mr. Santa Ana said, there's nothing wrong in championing a sovereign wealth fund, no? And
Yes.
it's not even wrong to champion it now kahit wala pa tayong excess funds. No? Kumbaga, pwede tayong maghanda na. Handa na natin yung infrastructure, yung corporate infrastructure for that to prepare for the arrival of excess funds, no? But the problem is from the very start, it's very clear na minamadali with the certification of urgency na, again, that's the first constitutional infirmity. So I suppose kung yung presidente natin, if our president really believes in the concept of a sovereign wealth fund for our country, then he would value taking the time, threshing out the issues, and also allowing us, the public, to learn more about it, no? Kasi ako, wala akong kaalam-alam. I was very happy to hear Mr. Santa Ana explain all of those things kasi natututo ako about what a sovereign wealth fund is and how it impacts governance, etc., etc. So, if our president really believes that, then the best option for him is to veto the bill, return it to Congress, and allow more public conversations about it.
Attorney, but if the law does go up to the Supreme Court, would the Supreme Court be willing? I mean, would it be comfortable dealing with the matters of economics? I mean, not the legal process or not the process of the bill, but the economic concepts themselves. Whether or not it makes sense for government to be doing this or that, and trying to generate more funds. Would that be the strength of the Supreme Court? Has it done that in the past?
Well, as far as the economics is concerned, no, the economic viability, etc., I suppose the Supreme Court will not touch on that. But definitely, the use of public funds will be an issue for them. Because again, I suppose it will be argued that the funds that will be used here are not excess funds. They are funds that are, practically speaking, already allocated for a public purpose, right? Yes. Like funds from DBP and Land Bank, they are already controlled by the charters of these banks, no? So there is a legal and constitutional interest in itself because public funds are being used. So the economics, I suppose they would avoid that, but definitely they will look into the fact that public funds are being used here.
Professor Santa Ana, I want to ask you, assuming that the president does return it to them, to tell them to make the proper amendments in order to avoid questions of constitutionality, don't you think that the only thing that they will address anyway will be the correction of sections 50 and 51 on the prescription, that they will probably, and most likely actually, not go through the debate of whether a Maharlika investment fund is good for us? I mean, in other words, Don't you think they've crossed that threshold already?
There's something that Attorney Michael, forwarded in our discussion today. It's a new insight for me, an insight for everyone, including the policymakers. The use of public funds can become a constitutional issue. Of course, you don't know what the outcome will be, but there seems to be a solid constitutional argument behind that.
But again, the president will have to sign it first into law
Yes.
before we can raise the issue of constitutionality with the Supreme Court. So, kumbaga, I guess what I'm saying is, why don't, because we're all saying, ba't di na lang kasi ibalik dyan at pag-usapan ulit?
Yes.
Oo, yun na nga. Even if he does the noble thing, which is, forget
Walang
about,
deadline.
Oo, forget about bringing this up in the SONA, di ba? Di ba tapos na yung usapan? Ako, ang sense ko is tapos na yung debate as far as they're concerned. Yeah.
In that regard, gusto kong balikan what, if I may call you Michael, to become a little informal in our discussion. What you said about yung minamadali, this is a bigger worry for me because this happens not only in relation to Maharlika, but to other critical issues. Minamadali, and in the process, it becomes muddled. Another example, and I hope the chiefs will discuss this in another episode, the proposed transfer of PhilHealth to the Office of the President.
Yes.
Na madali na naman yan. We don't even know what the
Actually,
national is. Diya sila, it looks like a good idea. They form a committee to study it, but they already have a proposal. That's not the way to do it. And then we hear the incoming DOH secretary saying that it's a done deal.
Hey, Professor,
That's another
actually,
example of minamadali.
Professor,
And what happens is the whole idea becomes very muddled.
yeah. Hey, Professor Professor Santa Ana and Attorney Yusinko, actually related doon eh. I mean, to your point, I'm glad you mentioned na, look, sa totoo lang, di lang naman dito nangyayari yan. I want your thoughts on the level not just of economics or the law, but really on the level of public policy in the Philippines. Yung position dito ni Senator Amy Marcos, which is basically now she's gotten to the point where she said, these are not her words, correct me if I'm wrong, but essentially she's saying, may problema dito sa batas na to eh, parang baka taliwas to sa saligang batas natin. Pero kung maging batas, sundin na lang natin. 'Di ba? Apart from, not taking a position here, your thoughts on that kind of an argument, because in reality, it happens on so many levels and on so many things. What does that do for public policy in the Philippines?
I'll go first, no? Well, it's wrong. It's plainly wrong, no? On two fronts. Number one, if you are a lawmaker and you admit that you did not participate in the lawmaking process, that's already wrong, no? You should have participated in the lawmaking process and shout to the top that what they're doing was wrong, and therefore do everything you can to prevent that from happening, no? Filibuster or whatever. So the fact that you did not participate, that is already wrong as far as being a lawmaker is concerned. And secondly, it's not also advisable to tell the public that something illegal or something unlawful should be followed, no? Especially after saying that it's wrong, it's unlawful, it's unconstitutional. That is a wrong advice to give to our people. It's again, what she said, what she advised to the public should not be followed. It's wrong, and I suppose it's not disappointing because she should have done her work. But as we know, some of our lawmakers, well, they don't do their work properly.
Professor Men.
Oh, amen to what Attorney Yusinko said.
Men says amen.
Well,
Okay.
Definitely a fascinating conversation. Akala namin may kahit papaano may closure tayo dito sa at this point, pero walang tigil, no? We will keep talking about this. We'll also no doubt take up your suggestion, Attorney Santa Ana, on PhilHealth and all the other things. In the meantime, that's all we have. No, that's all we have for the Chiefs. We hope it was discussed. We'll keep the conversation going. Ako po si Robbie Alampay.
I'm Ami Pamintuan of the Philippine Star.
I'm Lucy Cruz Valdez of News 5.
I'm Ed Lingao. We are One News, all sides, all the time.